Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host, Michael, and this episode is Q&A number 30. As always, any questions that you want me to answer, send them to michael@scientifictriathlon.com, and that's Michael with a K, or send them on Facebook through the Facebook Messenger widget on scientifictriathlon.com. Big thanks to Roka for sponsoring this episode. Roka are the world leaders in wetsuits, tri-suits, and other triathlon and swim apparel, as well as high-performance eyewear. If you haven't yet checked out the eyewear range, then I highly recommend that you do so. The sports sunglasses are really great. They are super light and comfortable, and they are impossible to shake off your face, which is really, really cool to just try to make them fall off and you realize that you can't do it. I like playing around with that. I don't know if it's a saying in English actually, but in my native language, Swedish, we have a saying that's something along the lines of simple people have simple pleasures. And that's one of my simple pleasures, I guess, to try to make the Roka sunglasses fall off my face and failing time and time again. But the Roka now also have prescription glasses, and they have various customization options for their various eyewear ranges and also home try-on options. So definitely go and check out all the options that they have on roka.com and use the promo code TTS all caps to get 20% off your entire order. And big thanks to Precision Hydration that you can find on precisionhydration.com. They make electrolyte products that help you get hydrated and stay hydrated. And the best way to get started with that is by taking the free online sweat test. That will take you through a short quiz of around about 10 questions that you will answer quantitatively, no measurements or anything like that needed, just things along the lines of, do you have salt stains on your helmet straps and things like that. That will give you a ballpark estimate for how much sodium you lose in your sweat when you're exercising, and based on that, Precision Hydration can make you an individual hydration strategy. And of course, if you want to take it a step further, then go ahead and try their products to help you get that right amount of sodium in your hydration. And if you do that, use the promo code That's Triathlon Show, all one word, all caps, to get your first box for free. All right, so today's first question, and actually today's only question because it's a long one, which with many parts, is from Roger in Minnesota. And he writes, "Hi Michael, I'm an average middle-of-the-pack age group triathlete, and I've been doing Olympic and 7.3 distance triathlons for 10 plus years. This year I am moving to my first full distance Ironman, and I have a few questions or topics for your podcast. The first is weekly or daily data analysis for self-coached athletes. I use Training Peaks to organize all my workouts, part of an 80-20 purchased plan, and to capture my data, my workouts. I realized that I have a pretty superficial use of the data that I'm collecting, and I'm not sure how to adjust my generic plan beyond the automatic retargeting with each power or pace zone update. I'm typically putting in the correct power zones, especially on the trainer erg mode in Swift, where it adjusts resistance to the right power. So looking at power zones should be boring. I'm not quite getting what you're saying here, but I guess it shouldn't be possible to make any mistakes or something like that is what you mean. Either way, Roger writes, swim, bike, and run FTP power pace testing are my only real metrics to monitor. All right, so I'll stop here and add in a few comments. So what you should do here is you should make sure that your RPE, your rating of perceived exertion, and your heart rate, that you monitor them alongside power and pace, and that you adjust workouts based on how hard that input, in terms of, if we can consider RPE and heart rate, that is the input of how hard you're working, and the power or pace, that's the output, what you're actually producing. So make sure that you have a handle on what your input typically is. And for easy endurance workouts, I think you can go through a long training cycle and you do not need to change your output, your power or pace at all. Let's say you're running at 8-minute miles for your easy run pace. you do not need to get faster. You should. I think that you should actually not try to get faster over, let's say, a 12-week cycle. Just keep running at around that same pace. Of course, you're not running necessarily to pace, but that sort of effort. You're not working to push your easy pace or your easy power on the bike at all. You just let it be what it is. And watch your heart rate come down. That is so amazing when you see that happen. When you, over weeks and weeks and weeks, you see that, okay, my pace is the same, my power is the same, but my heart rate now is actually 20 watts lower than what it used to be. And I've seen this personally now the last 4 weeks or so since I got back from, I was sick for 12 days or so. And then my heart rate was unusually high coming back for a few days. And I see that my heart rate has been coming down to all-time low levels, but not in a bad overtraining type of way, but really I'm just feeling that my training is working so well right now. And it's exciting to see that on my very easy, boring rides and runs, that how low I can get my heart rate on those runs. So that's definitely something that I would encourage you to do in terms of following the plan and adjusting your generic plan that was the initial question here that I'm answering. However, for your harder workouts, your interval workouts, where changes may happen in fitness may happen over the course of even a couple of weeks, then you shouldn't do your VO2 max intervals, for example, at say 300 watts from week 1 through week 10 or whatever, just because 300 watts is what your FTP test says that you should do, and you don't have another one until week 10. What you should do is you should learn in the first few weeks after testing what that right effort feels like, because at the beginning, hopefully the power level will be appropriate. So you can follow the power there and you learn what it feels like, how hard it is, and see what heart rate levels you reach in those intervals. And then going forward, just make sure that you keep hitting those RPEs. And I would focus especially on RPE in these interval workouts rather than heart rate. Make sure that it feels as hard every time. You always go pretty deep in those workouts. And also check that your heart rate is sort of in the ballpark. It's going to vary, and especially depending on the interval duration, but check that it's in the ballpark. Because if it's suddenly 10 beats per minute lower than what it used to be, then maybe you're not hitting the right zone. So I think that you should expect that your power or pace should go up in interval workouts. And that's why it's very important to be in tune with your normal RPEs and heart rates from right after testing. Now, do keep in mind that some days are just not your best day. So if your pace or power is lower 1 week than it was the last, but the effort and heart rate is right, then be okay with it, move on. There's nothing wrong with that at all. As long as you're in the ballpark of the type of output, pace, power that you should be hitting. Now, if you're 50 watts lower than normal, then something is obviously wrong, and you should abort that session. You're too fatigued, or something else is going on. So it makes no sense to push through. But if you're 15 watts lower, that can be quite a lot, depending really on what the workout is. But in many cases, 15 watts is actually okay. You can still get a good workout when you're 15 watts slower than you were last week, especially if last week was maybe an exceptionally good workout. So you need to keep that in mind as well, that last week is not necessarily your average type of performance. And also don't get married to exporting the sessions from Training Peaks to the erg mode on your trainer. I think it's often better to do the workouts without erg mode, especially unless you're an advanced athlete, because you can tend to lock yourself into an intensity either too high or too low, and lose this intuitive sense of how hard you should be going on any given day. Sure, you have that intensity range that you should sort of follow, but there is some wiggle room within it, and to go harder when you feel really good, and not necessarily kill yourself just as much when you feel a bit worse, but still get a good workout out of it. So I would say try not to use erg mode all the time as well. That would be a tip. Okay, Roger's next question. Training Peaks has the scoreboard metrics of fitness, fatigue, and form. And these are also called CTL, chronic training load, ATL, acute training load, and TSB, training stress balance. But I don't know what to do with those other than to feel good about the CTL or fitness number getting higher. Okay, so comment to that. I know that in one of my earlier podcast episodes, I talked a bit about how to use it. And that is probably one of few podcast episodes that I would consider retracting if I could. I guess I could. Technically, I know I could. But I do want to keep the entire archive of podcasts up there because in the name of transparency and for people to be able to see how the podcast has developed. But either way, I think that the information isn't wrong by any means in that episode. But what I didn't quite realize when I did that episode is that these metrics are so often used so out of context and they are overemphasized so incredibly. And some people even completely mix up improving performance with improving these somewhat arbitrary metrics. So if they see the fitness number going down, they think that their performance is going down, but that's not necessarily the case. And so I would not really, that's a bit of a, I guess, background to my answer. So what I would say is that you do not need to worry about it getting higher. You have a plan that you're committed to, so follow that plan and make adjustments if needed. But the fitness number, the CTL number, that's not a reason to make adjustments to a plan because there's so much more important stuff going on than that CTL number. And you can make an algorithm to plan the ideal plan for optimizing your fitness number. That's not a problem, but that's not going to be the best training plan. So don't worry about that. And I think for self-coach athletes and highly analytical self-coach athletes and numbers-driven athletes, the CTL it's sort of generates some of the most common training mistakes of all. So I don't really, I'm starting to be kind of almost anti-CTL, but it forces people to, or it makes people base training on improving CTL rather than on improving performance and adaptations to training. So this, I'm getting a bit sidetracked, but this is actually a good sidetrack. I think that you should ask yourself two questions when you are following a training plan and when you are developing a training plan. And that goes both as a coach and as an athlete. So those two questions are, let's say now in this case, you are following a training plan. Am I getting faster? And the second is, am I adapting well to the training? If you follow the guidelines I gave you just a minute ago with adjusting the intensities as needed, so on the intense workouts, you should expect your power to go up and not just follow the same power numbers for 10 weeks or whatever. But on the easy workouts, don't worry about going faster. Just keep them easy. If you do follow these two main principles that I think are important for anybody using a generic training plan, then you should see that you are getting faster. And you could see that by seeing that in those hard intervals, you notice that, hey, I've increased my interval power by 10 watts over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And that means that you are getting faster. Your CTL may have been getting lower during this period for all that you and I know, but it does not matter if you are getting faster doing it. Next question from Roger is, I see some articles, references to WKO4 in Training Peaks forums and on your website, but it seems like the learning curve may be a level beyond what is realistic for self-coached athletes. Yes, definitely beyond what is realistic and also beyond what is useful and actionable for self-coach athletes. A good tool for coaches, but no, I would strongly encourage you to not go for WKO4 as an athlete. Next question. Is there a good checklist of data analysis items that the self-coach athlete should look at each week or month when assessing their training data beyond the regular but not weekly swim, bike, run, power, pace, heart rate numbers from FTP test? Yes. So I did an episode called Beginner Tip 29, Metrics You Should Be Tracking, and I'll link to that in the episode description. And I would look at this on a block basis, so perhaps a monthly basis would be quite normal. Let's say that you train in 3 or 4 week blocks. Then at the end of each block, you can sit down and look at what you did during that block and in the past block, and use that to, I guess, plan for the next block going forward, even though you already have your plan. But it's a good sort of time frame. So I guess since you already have your training plan, maybe monthly is good. And those key metrics, I give more details in that episode, so definitely go and listen to it. But some of them are related to the process. And the most important one of all is compliance. How compliant are you to the workouts? How many of them are you doing? And I think that you should be doing at least 85% to be able to say that you're actually following a plan. Otherwise, you're not really following the plan. But shoot for 95 to even 100%, of course. The second one is volume. How much training volume are you putting in? That's always very important. And that's, of course, basically determined by your plan. So you determine it when you choose the plan that you buy, essentially. Then the next one that can be useful is training intensity distribution. If you have good numbers for that, you could look at how much time you spend in each intensity zone. So whether you look at power or heart rate. But it can get a bit tricky, so I wouldn't worry too much about that, to be honest, as an athlete. But, well, it doesn't hurt to have a quick glance and see if you are roughly where you should be in relation to what the plan actually says that you should be doing. So in addition to the process types of metrics, we have the performance ones, and these are race results and tests. So yeah, you mentioned these, the FTP tests, and key workout performance. So this is the example I gave above. You do a similar type of intervals each week for several weeks. What is your typical power in those intervals? It doesn't need to be, you don't need to look at it exactly. You can just, when you're in the workout, you notice that, hey, I'm holding roughly 305 watts compared to 300 watts last week. Wow. This is progress. So those are the things that I would look at. And today, if I could redo that episode, I would add one more, actually. And I don't know what to call it, but maybe something like smiley count. And the idea here is, and you know this since you're a Training Peaks user, that you can rate your workouts on the question, how strong did I feel in this workout? With a smiley face, with an emoticon. And if you felt really strong, you have a very, very happy smiley face. And then if you felt strong, you have a happy smiley face. Then you have a neutral face if you felt just normal, a good day at the office, but nothing special. Then you have a slightly frowning face and a very sad face if you felt weak or weaker than expected, or very, very weak, or much, much weaker than expected. And I think this is important because I think one of the most, you should expect that most of your workouts should be neutral. That is good. That is a good result. And then some will fall in the happier or more frowning face part of the spectrum. But I think that you should typically be on average at least neutral, because if your average falls on that frowning side, then that's a warning sign that something is not quite right. Maybe you're going too hard in your easy workouts. Maybe you're not sleeping well. It might be something with the recovery. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you have too much stress at work, something like that. But I think that that's something that is quite important to look at. And you don't even need to actually calculate this, but you will get a feel for it if you actually rate yourself after each workout. And if you can manage to have a significantly higher amount of smiley faces on that very happy side of things compared to the frowning side, then things are typically going really well. And that is a good feeling to have when you workout after workout can actually feel that, hey, I felt strong in this workout. And not just, I felt all right, I felt normal, but you actually felt strong, like really strong. That is a good feeling, and that is a feeling, and that is something that can be a very strong indicator of you improving. Next question. Are there typical areas that a self-coach athlete might adjust or tweak in their generic training plan based on what they're seeing in their data as they execute the prescribed workouts in the prescribed power or pace zones? So yeah, there's a lot, some more major, some minor. The most obvious ones and most important ones are related to not getting injured, overtrained, or sick. So for example, if you have a history of running injuries and you know that running on 2 consecutive days is a risk, then replace that second run with a swim or a bike. That is a sensible change to make to your generic plan. Another one is to add tune-up races. Generic plans, for obvious reasons, have one end race in them typically and no tune-up races, because people have different dates for when they might do tune-up races. That doesn't mean that it isn't a great idea to add a tune-up race, so I definitely recommend doing that and adjusting the plan accordingly. And but in terms of your question, which is adjusting based on what you see in the data, first of all, don't overthink things. I don't think that's if things are going well, like you your compliance is good, and that smiley face test that I just talked about is going well, and your key workout performances are improving, and your tests are going well, then keep doing what you're doing. If you're not improving, and again, look to those metrics that we talked about to determine whether you are or not, then you should, of course, try to assess why you're not improving. That doesn't mean, I don't want to say that you should with 100% certainty improve from one FTP test to the next, because you might be just a bit fatigued or have a bad day. So you need to take a more holistic approach to determine whether you're improving, and include also things like your workout performances, how strong you felt in the workouts, etc. All of those things we just talked about in assessing whether or not you're improving. It's not just based on the one FTP test to the next kind of result. But if you still come to the conclusion that you aren't improving as you should, then here's the troubleshooting checklist. First, compliance. So are you doing your workouts? First of all, getting them done, getting them checked off. Remember, at least 85% or you're not following the plan. But also, are you executing them correctly? Not doing the easy stuff too hard, not slacking on the hard stuff. Check the compliance. And again, so going a bit deeper, checklist item number 2 is going too hard on easy days. That's so common. And it can be such an easy fix if you just have the courage to go a bit easier when you're supposed to. Then the third, I also mentioned, not going hard enough on hard days. So be honest with yourself. Put in those honest efforts. Keep your RPE as high as it was at the start of the plan. It never gets easier. You just get faster, as I think Greg LeMond said, or some other cyclist like that. Next checklist item is critical volume. So it may be that you are on a plan that doesn't have enough training volume for you overall, or in a specific discipline for you to make improvements. Because there, at some point, depending on how fast you are, there is a critical volume for improvement. So the solution there might be to add endurance workouts. You don't need to add hard workouts, just endurance workouts in that discipline. And the next and final checklist item that I have here is excessive fatigue, or an imbalance in your training and recovery status. So if you think that this might be the case, then you might need to dial it down for a few days, and maybe remove all the intensity for a while, and even reduce volume a bit. One sign of excessive fatigue is that your muscles feel a bit like rubber, and you can't really produce any power no matter how hard you try. You can't get your heart rate up. So that's a way to identify it. Okay, moving on with the questions. Still more questions to come here. This is about details and options for FTP or critical power testing for bike and run. So Roger writes, you mentioned for the biking and running, you like the critical power testing suite from Inside software that looks at various lengths of time. But that may be less accessible throughout the training year to self-coach athletes without access to the software. All right, so comment. This is from, in episode 169, FTP, VO2 max, and VLA max, what triathletes need to know with Sebastian Weber. We talk about what you can learn with the Inside software. And yes, it is not accessible directly to athletes. It is accessible to coaches. So you need to do the testing for a coach that offers that service. I do it. I'll link to it in the episode description, or you can just go directly to scientifictriathlon.com. And in the menu bar, there is a tab called Inside Testing. So click that and you can learn more. So it is accessible to you because you can do it from your own home. You don't need to go to a lab to do it, and you just send in the power file, and then I take it from there and analyze it for you. But to go back to the question, can you verify accessible options or procedures for self-coach athletes on critical power testing? For example, do you like Sufferfest's 4DP testing with 5 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes, and 20-minute powers? All right. So as I said, I do Inside testing remotely, and or I offer that testing service. I do that testing myself, of course, on myself as well. And that is definitely my preference, because I don't know any other test that gives you knowledge of VLA max, at least not with the same accuracy. So your lactate building rate, which is really, really important when it comes to getting the full picture of your metabolic profile, which then gives you information on how to train to improve. Because depending on what your VO2 max and your VLA max is, you might have very different approaches to training. So that's definitely my number one. The number two option for me would be lab testing with VO2 and lactate. So a typical ramp test. And number three would be a lab or field testing with lactate. Again, a typical ramp test. And number four would be a 60-minute test, 60-minute time trial, because that way you actually get more of a true reflection of your functional threshold power compared to a 20-minute test with some sort of correction factor. And actually, that's a big advantage of the inside testing, that you do get a true reflection of it. It is validated, again, in scientific papers, of course, but you do get a true reflection because of the way that you are supposed to overpace the 20-minute effort. You start very hard, and then you just need to hold on and go as hard as you can, but your power will drop. But at some point, it will stabilize. And based on these sort of dynamics of the testing, you can calculate what the anaerobic threshold is. So it's not just your average power for a 20-minute. It's a bit more, a bit smarter than that. And that is why we can keep it to 20 minutes. But compared to just using a correction factor, whether it's 95% or 92%, I think that a 60-minute test is better, more accurate if you really want to know what your anaerobic threshold or your maximum lactate steady state is. And so the fifth in the order of priorities would be, I guess, something like Sufferfest, where you do a 20-minute test with a correction factor, but you also do those other tests like a 5-second, 1 minute, and 5-minute test. And the sixth and the last option would be the 20-minute test with a correction factor of 90 to 92% instead of the typical 95%. And some of my training plans, the more recent ones where I included a training zones calculator, they are already using 92% as that correction factor. Some of my earlier training plans, they still use 95%, and I do plan to go back and correct those because I don't think that 95% is a good correction factors. It overestimates your functional threshold power quite severely in many cases. So that is on the cards to update those in the future. But yeah, so I guess the worst option would be to do the 20-minute test with the 95% and rather than the 90 to 92% that I just mentioned that I recommended. So the final question here is there a comparable test sequence as the inside testing for running with pace or power? No, not a remote protocol the way that there is for cycling. There is a lactate test version where you get the exact same information, including VLA max for running, and as well as VO2 max, of course. And getting both of those two, that's the number one thing that makes inside, in my opinion, the best testing methodology, because you don't really get the two of them from any other protocol. But you do have to go to the lab for that in terms of running, because you do need to take lactate samples. So it's definitely worth doing, but you can't do it remotely. You need to seek out a local lab that also uses inside software to do that testing. All right, that wraps it up for today. And thank you, as always, for the questions. I'll link in the episode description to beginner tip 29, which was the one on the metrics that you should be tracking. The interview with Sebastian Weber to learn more about FTP, VO2 max, and VLA max. And to the page with more information on my inside testing service. So you can go and check that out if you're interested. Big thanks to today's sponsor, Precision Hydration. Check them out on precisionhydration.com. Take their free online sweat test and use the promo code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, all caps, to get your first box for free. And big thanks to Roka as well for sponsoring the podcast. You can find them on roka.com. That's ROKA.com. And you can get 20% off your entire order, whether you're into wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, or high-performance eyewear, with the promo code TTS, all caps. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.